first of all, many thanks for the invitation. It's my first time here, and I'm so happy to be with your department. Ljubljana is a beautiful place. And then I would like to thank the organizing committee, Timotej, all your colleagues, especially you, because we were emailing. And special thanks for being so patient with me and sending all the stuff you needed. Now, my talk is based on Kant's third critique, especially not that his philosophy of biology, but mostly on this cognitive machinery of the reflecting power of judgment, and how we can flesh out this still a bit unexplored area in Kant's philosophy of science, especially Kant's philosophy of biology, in order to make some matchings with recent debates, since I'm doing quite a lot recently in the function debate, and I would like to put Kant or Kantian insights, and in order to see what's still interesting when we compare it to the most recent stuff done in the function debate. You mentioned before Justin Garson, but also the other people, and now we are putting up together with Zdenka Brzovic and Justin Garson, a new anthology on philosophy of biological functions, covering not only philosophy of biology, but many other areas. So I'm also doing some advertising here, as Alejandro before. Now I will start reading my paper. Frankly, it's polished up, so if you have any comments, maybe I'm going to use that for follow-ups. But still, I'm going to present the highlights of my talk using slides, so I think it's easier for you to follow my presentation. In this paper, I address the problem of the knowability of empirical laws of nature in Kant's general account of laws of nature, and the role that the presupposition of the unity of experience as a system has in coming to know an empirical law. Special emphasis is put on biological laws, broadly construed as a distinct subset of empirical laws of nature that have the form of teleological judgments, which then are important in methodologically profiling the explanatory practice of the life sciences more generally. In section 20 of the Prolegomena, Kant illustrates the distinction between the judgments of perception and those of experience, respectively, with the following examples. The first example: when the sun shines on the stone, it becomes warm. And the second one: the sun warms the stone. The latter judgment instantiates an empirical or particular law with Kant's overall account of laws of nature. In that regard, the pivotal point is concerned here with the character of the connection between the concept of sunshine and heat, which, according to Prolegomenas, is necessarily universally valid, hence objective. Now, as recently highlighted by Breitenbach, there are two main issues related to general account of empirical laws of nature. Apart from the above-mentioned necessity issue, which is standardly debated in the philosophy of science as an important criterion for laws of nature, there is also the knowability issue, namely how we come to know an empirical law, such as the sun warms the stone. An additional question that arises is the role performed by Kant's presupposition of unity of experience as a system with respect to the necessity and knowability of biological, and additionally, as I argue and try to illustrate in section 3 of the present paper, biomedical laws, as well, full stop. In other words, is this role substantial of this presupposition in solving the above two issues, or only subsidiary or even non-existent? Accordingly, there are four leading interpretations of the issues regarding the necessity and knowability and their obvious link to unity of experience as a system in Kant's philosophy of science. First interpretation, so-called the best system interpretation, this is basically Philip Kitcher's interpretation, which in brief claims that unity of experience as a system solves both the issue of necessity and knowability of empirical laws. Second interpretation, called the derivation account, This is Michael Friedman's interpretation. Downplaying the role played by unity of experience as a system and claiming that derivability from a priori laws of nature solves the whole issue. Third interpretation, the most recent one, very unusual but interesting, called necessitation account. Kreins is the leading figure in this group. Further downplays the role of unity of experience as a system and grounds the necessity of empirical laws and the reference to so-called natural properties, as we'll see in section 2. However, as to the knowability issue specifically, this interpretation is still not entirely clarified. Finally, interpretation 4 combines some components of interpretations 2 and 3, but also in an important sense, as I point out in section 2 and 3, interpretation 1 as well. In this paper, I primarily focus on the knowability of empirical laws, and then only secondly, to some extent, on the issues of necessity and role of unity of experience as a system in Kant's overall account of laws of nature and their role in the scientific practice of the life sciences. That is, in the case addressed here, biological sciences and their application to medicine. This is the way I intend life sciences. Biology plus its application to medical practices. I further explore the common interpretive thread or line of interpretation present in 1 and 2, according to which the knowability of, for example, the causal mechanism of the sun's warming of an object is secured by its being classified within a hierarchical ordering of more general judgments, namely certain physical laws. On my account, the relationship between knowability and a classification of this kind is ultimately based on Kant's characterization of our understanding, Verstand in that sense, as being discursive, i.e. specifically relying on subsuming procedures, as argued in the critique of the power of judgment, this famous 75777 sections of the third critique. In the same context, the third critique addresses the topic of teleological judgments, referring basically to individual organisms, which apply the corresponding type of biological purposiveness. For instance, when we say, leaves of a tree perform photosynthetic processes for the maintenance of containing biological system. Now, these and similar theological judgments, according to Kant's general account of lawfulness of nature, should also have the status of an empirical law. Biological laws, hereafter I will understand them in a more encompassing sense, that is, including also their applications to the medical domain, having specific features as laws pertaining to the special sciences. In addition, as representing theological judgments dealing with the knowability issue in their own manner. As well known, the specificity of empirical laws of nature, referring to biological phenomena, is a consequence of the mechanism-teleology-specific relationship in Kant's philosophy of biology. In that regard, I argue that, first, the knowability of biological laws equally relies on subsuming procedures, which in this specific case consist in explanatory integration between teleological and causal mechanical judgments. Secondly, the role of unity of experience as a system through that integration departing from a simply classificatory one as standardly endorsed in the literature on merely gestured at an alternative view, such as Breitenbach's papers. But before delineating my account of the knowability of biological or more specifically biomedical laws, let us see first some relevant outcomes of the empirical laws debate in the Kant recent scholarship. This is the corresponding slide. So the following options in focusing on Kant's overall account, as you can see on the slide, of empirical laws of nature have been recently advanced, according to which the corresponding debate in the literature will be assessed in what follows. Firstly, the nomic status of empirical laws, and secondly, the role of the idea of experience as a system, this a priori position in the appendix in the first critique, and the then tend to be maxims of the reflecting power judgment in the third critique. So firstly, the nomic status of empirical laws. In this subsection, I will focus on Friedman's derivation account and more recent the necessitation account, such as Krein's position. Friedman's derivation account can be summarized through the following main features. First feature, a minimal, exclusively methodological or even heuristic role played by Kant's unity of experience as a system assumption. Thus, according to this account, the role in question is not nomic related, i.e., unity of experience as a system does not influence our considerations why certain regularities detected in the empirical data may be elevated to the nomic status or to be viewed as empirical laws of nature. Secondly, what instead is nomic related pertains to the transcendental a priori and strict universal laws of nature. More precisely, Friedman's derivation account sees in the so-called grounding or nesting procedure of perceived empirical regularities. Think, for example, of the prolegomena case study. When the sun shines on a stone, it becomes warm, under ultimately the a priori law or laws of nature. At the root, this is the only plausible solution to both the necessity and knowability issues that trouble Kant's account of particular or empirical laws of nature. Recently, different versions of the so-called necessitation account have been proposed. For the purposes of the present paper, it is important that the necessitation account is decisively ontologically oriented, that is, advocates a bottom-up approach. Namely, one asserts that the assumption that there are dispositional properties in the world that manifest themselves regularly and then the laws describe such regularities. But most importantly for our discussion, the necessitation account deems that empirical laws of nature specifically belong to the group of laws of nature that are unknowable to a Kantian epistemic subject, given their robust ontological dependencies in comparison to the transcendental and metaphysical laws of nature. Now, what on my account remains unsatisfactory in the interpretations described above is concerned with, first, that exact role played by unity of experience as a system in this domain, and second, models for solving the knowability issue. Namely, on the derivation account, Kant's influence on unity of experience as a system remains unclear, especially in the critique of the power of judgment. On the necessitation account, the empirical laws are not knowable, which is an implication that I find unsatisfactory. The paper now turns to the accounts that are focusing exactly on the nomic specificities of the special empirical sciences, such as biology and biomedical sciences, or the life sciences in a stricter sense, plus on the previously highlighted role of unity of experience as a system assumption. So the role of idea of the unity of experience as a system, I'm going to explore this role in the following section. I examine accounts that emphasize the role of Kant's a priori assumption, unity of experience as a system, in accounting for the nomic status of empirical regularities in nature, such as primarily the best interpretation by Philip Kitcher and Breitenbach's reflection model. Kitcher's best system interpretation, which has the longest tradition in debate under consideration, and it looks very familiar if you take into consideration previous positions such as David Lewis' systemic approach to laws of nature. So it's Kitcher's application of this previous idea to Kant's overall account of laws of nature. And his interpretation extensively evaluates the idea of presupposition of unity of experience as a system in solving the two main issues of empirical laws of nature in Kant's overall account. According to Kitcher's reading, unity of experience as a system solves both the necessity issue and, more importantly for the purposes of the present paper, the knowability issue. In other words, we come to know a perceived empirical regularity as a particular or empirical law of nature if and only if its corresponding formulation is embedded within the most systematized of all the rival scientific theories at a given time, ultimately at the projected end of scientific investigations. Apart from some differences between this notion of a best system and Kant's own use of unity of experience as a system, the interpretation here in question raises the important question: how is unity of experience as a system related to the way in which we explanatory account for natural phenomena, especially in the empirical sciences that deal with highly organized natural systems, such as so-called organized beings in Kant's third critique? In my view, there is a connection between the notion of best system and Kitcher's unificationist account of scientific explanation. However, I claim that the latter does not fully match up with Kant's linking of unity of experience as a system, scientific explanation, and in particular the structure of explanations in the life sciences. I address that point in the next section, but before that, Breitenbach corresponding reading is examined. This is fourth interpretation given here, which also endorsed the extended interpretative focus on the role played by unity of experience as a system, but differently than Kitcher's best system interpretation. Okay. So the Breitenbach's interpretation extends the focus even more toward unity of experience as a system in the debate in question, through which she includes not only its wider epistemological relations, but also connections to philosophy of the empirical or so-called norm-proper natural sciences, as called by Kant in metaphysical grounding and grounding of natural sciences. I will enumerate and briefly describe the main dependencies of Kant's unity of experience as a system with regard to his account of empirical laws more strictly, and then compare this fourth reading, as mentioned before, to my views here, and especially in section 3, where the methodological outlook or landscape, I'm calling this, of the life sciences more strictly will be addressed. Breitenbach's reflection model is the main interpretative notion that not only for solving the knowability and necessity issue, but is also related to several other notions in understanding Kant's epistemology and philosophy of science, such as the unity versus disunity of nature of science, the forms of disunity, notions concerned with the issue of distinctively biological laws, and the structure of biological explanation via these laws, as being some of the notions that are more closely related to the model in question. Thus, given the breadth of the reflection model and the fact that it in certain significant respects addresses the same issues in Kant's philosophy of biology as the account delineated in the next section, I will first examine the model's more important components and secondly its further ramifications. We can distinguish the reflection model for the knowability of the a priori laws of nature, which appears to be less complex than the model for the knowability of empirical laws. The former model is based on the notion of a priori reflection, relating to the role of a priori or strictly universal laws of nature. In that regard, consider the way in which we come to know, for instance, the second analogy of experience or the analogy a priori cognates. However, the empirical reflection model or the corresponding model in the strict sense, according to Breitenbach's interpretation, appears to have a far more challenging task. In that sense, the reflection model is contraposed to Friedman's derivation account, namely to the very idea of derivation, or that the knowability issue should be solved through grounding or nesting of empirical regularities, such as in the prolegomena example, as more or less particular instances of the a priori universal law. So to say, this is so-called at the top manner of law hierarchy by genus and species. On the other hand, Breitenbach extensively opposes this solution. The a priori laws do have a substantial role in solving the knowability issue of empirical laws, but not in the at the top manner, but rather from within. This brings us to the core components of the reflection model, i.e. the central part of the fourth interpretation in this debate, which in a certain sense upgrades the most valuable points deployed in the preceding interpretation. Okay. So in sum, I interpret her solution primarily to the knowability issue as an ultimate consequence of the extended interpretative focus, that is, as an outcome of Kant's previous claims defended mainly in the appendix to the transcendental dialectic of the Critique of Pure Reason. The reflection model, with its two core components, represents an attentive systematic interpretation of the relevant textual evidence, and contrary to other interpretative accounts, is not based on a single privileged relation, that is the derivational relation in Friedman's account or other accounts, but opts instead for a pluralistic approach. In the next section, and that will be the final section, I will argue that when examined in more detail, Breitenbach's interpretative model ultimately suggests a monistic approach based on a determined explanatory relation. Furthermore, if we put scientific explanation at the center of a solution to the knowability issue in Kant's account of empirical laws of nature, then on my account we may avoid an odd consequence in Breitenbach's reading, according to which the reflection model generates an improper knowledge or no scientific knowledge at all in the strict sense. I will instantiate my account of the knowability of empirical laws through the structure of explanation in medical physiology, as reconstructed from the critique of the power of judgment and its first introduction. In solving the knowability and necessity issue in Kant's account, the a priori laws can have at the top position, derivation account, or the one from within, as in reflection model. Hence, depending on the position we assign with regard to Kant's account, the following features of the unity under consideration ensue. In the case of the derivation account, a single hierarchical or reductionist form of the unity of cognitions, and in this case, in which Breitenbach's reflection model position is assumed, a pluralist, so the other one, organicist, so-called organicist, or non-reductive form is obtained. Thus, Kant's position in the debate on the unity, disunity of science/nature issue, according to Breitenbach, is most accurately interpreted by endorsing the from within position of the a priori laws, which consequently points to a certain pluralistic form characterizing the unity of cognitions in the sciences. This is really important insight in Breitenbach's interpretation, in my view. In particular, as we take into consideration the reflecting power of judgment to be applied by Kant's philosophy of biology in the methodology of the theological power of judgment of the third critique. In what follows, I argue for an interpretation based on the way in which, according to Kant's philosophy of science, the empirical sciences explain and/or predict their phenomena of interest. The reason for that interpretative approach is prompted by the fact that the connection between the role played by unity of experience as a system and the attribution of gnomic status to empirical regularities appears to be conclusively characterized in the third critique analysis of our explanatory efforts at the interface of physical and the life sciences. This way of focusing on Kant's account in question will be further examined in the case of how we, according to the methodology of the teleological power of judgment, configure or structure biological and biomedical explanation via certain relationship between different types of laws. To illustrate these points concerned with laws in the specific domain in the life sciences, such as medical physiology, I will refer to examples from different levels of biological organization. Hopefully, this will also show how Kant's machinery of the reflecting power of judgment, in particular, may look like when deliver epistemically good explanations of the natural phenomena in biology and medicine or the life sciences. Let me just refresh my apparatus. Now, the final section, I used a biblical reference, and then this is the following one. By their deeds you will know them. So the knowability of laws so we are recognizing, we are giving gnomic status to certain regularities on the basis how they perform in scientific practices. In my view, a determined convergence between Breitenbach's reflection model and Kitcher's best system interpretation can offer a plausible solution to the knowability issue. Now, the best system interpretation can be also viewed as an instantiation of Kitcher's more general account of scientific explanation, which, according to him, should be construed along the idea of a unification through argument patterns. Although I do not think that Kitcher's account in question is applicable to Kant's corresponding views, both generally and with respect to explanations in the life sciences, I do think that there is a close connection between unity of experience as a system, plus its co-working with especially the reflecting power judgment and our explanatory practices in the empirical sciences. In order to explicate that connection, I refer first to the structure of biomedical explanation of the phenomena related to the impairment of visual apparatus in humans and or explanatory strategies in plant physiology which work through different types of laws. And secondly, I refer to the way in which unit of experience as a system, interpreted as in the preceding section, is influencing how we come to know judgments dealing with certain life systems at the same time as distinctively biological or biomedical laws. Consider Kant's example of the human vision from the first introduction, and now we are ushering the normative side of Kant's philosophy of biology. Suppose we ask why John's eyes or their component parts of the crystalline lenses did not start to behave in the standard manner when strongly illuminated by a flashlight. Let me go back to this example. So this is the illustration of this example. Or so might go a follow-up situation stemming from Kant's above well-known example of teleological or function statement in medical physiology. So this is mainly, I'm here referring to cataract case, as well known. Now, the answer given by John's physician may go as follows. John has a diabetes since he reacted on this strong illumination by a flashlight in having eyes colored in a Milky Way. So this is kind of inference that a physician is doing. This answer, which also represents a compressed medical explanation of the particular natural phenomena under consideration, when more fully explicated, has a multi-layered structure. Thus, according to Kant, a first layer is concerned with the functional statement, or in Kant's terminology, teleological judgment that states that so-called inner possibility of the biological object in question. In this case, the teleological judgment refers to the expected physiological behavior of the crystalline lens. More specifically, the judgment is basically the following one. The crystalline lens in the eye has the end of reuniting the light rays at one point on the retina. By using the notion of the inner possibility in the above judgment, Kant seems to point out that biological objects have a range within which they show expected standard or normal physiological behavior. Accordingly, John's eyes, namely their component parts of the crystalline lenses, show specific dysfunctional behavior because it is out of the range of the standard physiological behavior, i.e., not producing the reuniting effect on the retina. That is why the above answer appeals to us as an acceptable scientific explanation of the detected particular phenomenon. However, that is only one part of more fully explicated scientific explanation. Moreover, according to Kant's philosophy of biology, the answer's explanatory power by itself is void if not related to a second layer in the structure of, here in particular, biomedical explanation, that is, the layer of a mechanism or merely mechanical laws, as put or in other or used by Kant, because the terminology he is using is not so uniform. Now, what enables scientific explanation of a particular biological phenomenon or even other types of explananda is a specific interdependence of the two layers. In other words, taken separately, no one explains the biological or biomedical phenomenon. Moreover, Kant, in the methodology of the teleological power judgment, further characterized the relationship in question as a subordination of the mechanism layer under the layer of teleological judgment. This kind of structure alone, according to the critique of the power judgment, can act as a good explanance in any explanatory effort in the biological and related sciences. The same applies to the above explanatory statement, John has a diabetes. It is explanatory because, in fact, presupposes a two-layered structure that I have just described. Suppose, in that respect, a mechanism telling what is going on in the crystalline lens at the molecular level of biological organization. So just this is the scheme that depicts that. Nevertheless, that layer is always related to the teleological judgment on functional statement referring to a range of inner possibilities of the biological objects involved. In our case, the physiological behavior of crystalline lens in the human eye. Now Breitenbach. Breitenbach, on the contrary, works out a three-layered structure. It's now I'm getting a bit scholastic, two-layered versus three-layered, but I think it's important. We can discuss that later on. So three-layered structure for explanations in the life sciences by Breitenbach via correspondingly three distinct groups of laws: teleological laws, biological ones, and finally immediately mechanical laws. I will not examine here Kant's exact position in the scientific explanation debate, but rather the extent to which, if at all, Breitenbach's so-called biological laws can be considered as being independent from teleological judgments or laws in Kant's philosophy of biology, and through that allegedly forming a separate layer according to Breitenbach's reading. I think that's important for what we're doing here. This normative was beautifully put by Sebastian at the beginning, because this distinction between theological laws and biological laws adds some new insights on Kant's position in this whole debate. So additionally, given the outcome of the above point, it might also influence the issue of what kind of model best accounts for the knowability issue in the area of the life sciences more generally. On both points, I depart from Breitenbach's reflection model and its ramifications, as I argue in the remainder of the paper. First, on Breitenbach's account, theological laws are not empirical, whereas biological laws are differentiated from the former exactly by being empirical. However, strictly speaking, there are no such independent group of laws of nature in Kant's philosophy of biology, at least as we take a look at the textual evidence. But as Breitenbach further claims, they can be discovered on the basis of Kant's position in the third critique, if at least two desiderata in naturalizing biological concepts are fulfilled. Apart from some difficulties of that interpretative line or thread, my main worries at this point are somewhat different. From Breitenbach's interpretation would, in the final analysis, follow that there are no biological laws in Kant, which would be contrary not only to his general account of laws of nature, but also to Breitenbach's open position on this matter in the third critique. Secondly, even more interesting point that follows from Breitenbach's above-mentioned reading is concerned with the fact that there is a rather sharp distinction between biological and teleological laws. However, biological laws are closely intertwined with teleological ones in Kant's philosophy of the biological and more broadly life sciences. This can be seen throughout the critique of the power judgment, where the extent of independence of the two layers in the overall structure of explanatory strategies dealing with explananda, such as malfunction in Jones' eyes or group of laws involved, is neither clear-cut, as in Breitenbach account, nor non-existent, such as in Ginsburg normative reading. Thus, I agree with the readings according to which, from Kant's general account of laws of nature, follows that there should also be particular laws referring to biological phenomena. I have advocated the two-layered explanatory structure in the examining scientific area, in which I have secured the place for distinctively biological and equally biomedical laws. These laws are on one side seen as particular outcomes of the reflection on biological phenomena, guided by theological consideration, such as the notion of objective purposiveness. And on the other side, this nomic structure, think again of the example of a functional inscription to the standard activity of crystalline lens, is linked to the relationship of subordination to merely mechanical laws. Consider here the physical and chemical laws in the human vision example. Thus, it is a specific capacity of particular theological judgments in the life sciences, such as the one instantiated in the crystalline lens example, namely establishing as many as possible explanatory connections with other groups of laws of nature, what justifies us in considering them as biological and more specifically biomedical laws. Second, the same capacity in building up the most stratified explanatory type of hierarchy of laws of nature in a certain scientific area is what makes them recognizable as empirical laws of nature in the first place. In other words, it is primarily explanatory and predictive capacity conceived as exemplified as in the above case study, the feature that is in fact at the core of the interpretative models for solving the knowability issue, at least of those epistemically oriented in the recent literature. Finally, as suggested throughout Kant's philosophy of natural science, the explanatory capacity more explicitly involves different types of explanatory relations, not exclusively unificationist one, as instead appears to be the case with the best system interpretation by Philip Kitcher. Now, finally, that's it. So, concluding remarks. The above assessment of the recent debate on the issue of knowability of Kant's empirical laws of nature, in particular as far as laws in the life sciences are concerned, has shown, first, conclusion. We come to know a teleological judgment referring to a biological phenomenon as a law of nature in virtue of its ability to form a determined local hierarchy and other similar forms with merely mechanical laws, as are instantiated by the case study stemming from biology. Second remark, this essentially systemic account of law likeness, see especially Lewis' famous counterfactuals monograph, keeps the main idea of hierarchical subordination of species to genera, which nevertheless assumes a different form in biology and medicine. In other words, the present paper highlighted the fact that the subordination of merely mechanical laws to corresponding theological judgment with regard to the explanandum phenomenon departs from a simple hierarchical subordination that is usually attributed to Kant's accounting question. So this is kind of innovative, following the line of interpretation by Angela Breitenbach. I characterized that type of hierarchy by which we come to know biological judgment having the status of an empirical law as an explanatory integration. Namely, the theological judgment is hierarchically integrated thanks to the epistemic roles it enables through a specific superordination of the already embedded mechanical laws. As I pointed out above, Kant's philosophy of biology emphasized the explanatory roles. And finally, the third concluding remark, as a further implication of the proposed reading, I reckon that this approach to the knowability issue of laws of nature in the special empirical sciences sheds some light on the way in which the reflecting power of judgment, at least as it generally characterized in introductions to the third critique, specifically plays out in the intricate area of the life sciences. And this is it. Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk, for also a meta perspective, but a somewhat different one, a different angle. Now, 15 minutes for debate. There's already one. So Moritz, maybe first.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting perspective. I don't have much experience with Kant, so if I didn't understand something, please just correct me. I'm very interested in like the usefulness of this differentiation from Breitenbach that you presented, especially like calling the difference between biological and mere mechanistic laws. Could you maybe go into detail there a little bit, because like my only understanding of mechanistic laws is like from neurobiology, for example, Craver in explaining the brain kind of puts mechanistic laws as like the highest goal of a scientific interpretation, where you can have like you can basically manipulate the model and like predict different ways that like how the mechanism changes, how the output of the mechanisms changes. So in Craver, it seems like this should be the goal of biological explanation, and calling it mere mechanistic laws seems like a very weak account. So yeah, I'm just wondering what is the difference between biological law and mere mechanistic?
There is certain parallelism between this mechanistic new agenda, and especially within this agenda, how the mechanism is related to function. Mechanism function relationship. I would say that you're completely right. Karl Predrag is, I think, the leading philosophers, in particular, is taking into account this mechanism and function relationship. In Kant, merely mechanical laws would be laws already existing with clear knowledge status and coming from physics, especially. For example, when we are using the example of physical optics, or laws coming from physical optics, and applying them to medical physiology. So malfunctioning of human eye. He has in mind those laws as merely mechanical laws. That would be kind of a nice example, is the issue of merely mechanical law, physical optics, and applied to medical physiology. Just to put it in Kant's context. Teleological, I quoted that sort of function of the eye or the crystal lens to focus light rays on a certain point of retina. That would be a classical example of function statement or teleological. What's perplexing that Leibniz is introducing biological laws as intermediate layer between teleological function statements and merely mechanical. That's really interesting. Because at the end, biological laws would be result of some kind of bottom-up inductive strategy. We are recognizing some regularities, those regularities involve normativity, but not the same type of normativity that somehow comes out of our mind. Theological judgment, which would be, on her account, having a priori status. So normativity, obviously, according to her, a priori normativity, because applied to biological phenomena, then biological laws separate from theological laws, having empirical status, but still displaying different kinds of normativity. And then finally, material kind of laws, such as laws existing already in physical optics and applied to medical context. That will be clarification of this two-layer structure, which I'm endorsing two-layer structure because given textual evidence, it's difficult to spot explicitly in Kant biological laws as something separate from teleological functional statements. That would be my point of view. But if you are going down the line of Kant's argument, I think that Angela is not completely wrong in calling this rule that we can endorse a separate layer of laws, so-called biological laws, having a specific kind of normativity, but having also empirical status. That would be clarification. Now, if you can go on, if you have some additional question, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Okay.
Thank you. That was a very interesting clarification. But just to wrap my head around it, it's basically like assuming non-reductive biological laws that are not teleological. Because like Craven's program seems to be very reductive in spirit, and like if we can explain everything from a mechanistic perspective, there is enough.
Mechanistic, it's still holding these functional states and functional level, because the mechanism displays certain function. So, and his perspective is like Kant's perspective. So he's holding this pragmatic point of view, so-called his perspective approach to perspectival approach to biological functions. So functions are coming out of interest by certain relevant scientific community. This is kind of, but still they are very useful. But nonetheless, they are he's holding quite clear anti-realistic position. Kant is also anti-realistic, but if things get a bit complicated if we introduce this separate intermediate level of biological laws. It's kind of getting closer to a realistic position, but this is a story for another second. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting talk. So if I understood you correctly, when you were going over Tucci's test system, interpretation and its connection to this implication of scientific explanation, you said that this doesn't square nicely with the Kantian view of the unity of experience. But if we take one of your main conclusions about teleological judgments making or pointing to these connections to all the types of scientific judgments, wouldn't this also be a vindication of a sort of unificationist view of scientific explanation, or do you think there's kind of a tension there?
I'm simply, yeah, it's good. Thanks for the questions. Really useful for this paper, but also for us. I'm simply not sympathetic to Philip's view that there's only one privilege expansive relation. If you have unification, then only then we get good explanation. I'm more drawn to this kind of pluralistic stance, like why shouldn't we by depicting or locating mechanism without clear unification or unification is the argument pattern. In that sense, we can also accept it as a good, reasonably good explanation. Simply by spotting important parts, producing certain phenomena, and that's very good, especially if you take how we explain diseases. Something is wrong with mechanism, something is broken, and that is important to squeeze that explanatory structure, unification, argument patterns, interaction, simply by that. I'm just trying to expand other explanatory relationships, not only focusing on this unification as in Philip's case. And this is my departure from this. Something more incremental than his or as I thought he said.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, any further questions? I have one question, and it basically relates to the previous exchange with Boris, when you said that the normativity in biological laws would be different than, for example, in other types of laws. So I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on this. So what type of normativity, and because, okay, you know, my not a Kantian scholar, but so basically
I pretend to be.
So normativity, for example, that you would get in the realm, I don't know, physics, it's understandable what he means by that, but when you want to move elsewhere, what kind of normativity would be involved, for example, in either biological laws, if you allow for this 3-point interpretation, if it's 2-point, you would probably still have to kind of come up with something, how these two mesh, and how they mesh, there would have to be an interesting story, right? So just, if you could maybe...
You mean the sources of normativity?
Yes, and specifically when it comes to the question of the normativity in the field of the organic, of the biological.
Absolutely. Now, one response to your question would be, obviously, it's the source of normativity in Kant in our minds.
Yes.
According to Predrag, our reason specifically is that's the whole model that he's having in mind when he's talking about logical normativity. And logical normativity is born out of our propensity, especially of human reason, to interpret such a reality. Then, second response to your point would be, let's make a thought experiment, such as what would happen if Kant would have met Darwin or recent method approaches in functional data. Now I'm quite prone to let he would somehow accept this touristic trend at least in the functional data. And then on the other side, we have a very interesting point of view, this scope of primitive normativity, though you are more familiar with that, by Hannah Ginsberg. He's both excellent Kant scholar. We are studying the same parts of Kant's philosophy of science, but he's holding that no. In that case, Kant would stick with this original idea. And that's why I think it's very interesting to explore in this context Hannah Ginsberg views on normativity, both in biology but also beyond that. And Kant probably you are more familiar with that. This notion of primitive normativity, you mentioned that about. Were you referring to like Hannah Ginsberg works, or you are not?
No, not directly.
That's really something that we just pointed out to you and also to me. Reflecting on this strange combination of Hans Winkler following so faithfully Kant's view on normativity, but also following primitive normativity in philosophy, language, epistemology, or other stuff beyond, apart from Kant's work, which is defending. So, first response, second one is thought experiment. What would happen if Kant would meet Darwin or some other followers? In my view, he would somehow accommodate. According to, because he's quite attractive guy at the end, at least I'm seeing that. And then he's no, he was speaking to this and the only source of material are is friendly. That's it. So my response is twofold, and I'm just trying to give you something.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Any further questions? Short ones? Okay. Well then, thank you very much.